Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on part one of a conversation John, Dick, and I had about F1 circuits and tracks. With our podcast anniversary, the guys and I decided to pull from our unreleased content archive. Last year, a few races into the season, we decided to sit down and discuss the full calendar of Formula One circuits and tracks, things we liked and considered noteworthy. When I say we, I really mean John and Dick. As you'll hear, I asked questions of these old school fans and racers. They were, as usual, a stockpile of excellent insights and information. We never got around to releasing this conversation, but still believe it has value for all of you within this Two Guys, a Girl, and F1 community. So as a thank you to all of you, we're sharing it now. But before we get into the conversation, I need to take a moment to ask, have you subscribed to or followed the show on your favorite podcast app? Have you shared the show with your fellow F1 fans? If not, can you take a moment to do so now? For an indie podcast like us, that's how we grow. And to those of you who have already done so, the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, gentlemen, you both are a wealth of knowledge, in my opinion, when it comes to looking at all these tracks. I think as we've had our various episodes, I hear different pieces and I go, wow, I wish we could just do a comprehensive, which is what I would like to do today. And so we're going to go through the races. I'd like to think about the historic aspects of some of these circuits, some of them that are newer. What are some of the memorable races? But most of all, the highlights when we look at a specific track. The calendar this year started with Sakir for testing. Do you think that out of all the places that testing could be done, that was the place to do it?
It's a good choice for weather. I don't think that the track is a great track for testing, depending on what they're testing for. But it is a permanent facility, so it has the facilities that are needed. It's in the Arab area there, so it's the weather is going to be nice and hot and dry, and so it's probably a good place for them to test. It's been a problem circuit when they initially laid it out. The drivers were not real happy with it, felt like it was dangerous, and so they've made changes to it over time, but probably makes sense for testing just from the standpoint of the time of year.
You know, I always kind of wonder about some of these tests, you know, when you go out to these areas where you have huge swings in temperature and you've got the potential for wind and sand blowing across the track, and you know, how much of that does that really translate to? I've got my questions about it, but you know, it's what they chose to do. I mean, historically they've always tested at Barcelona, which to me makes more sense.
So let's move on to the next place in the Middle East, which also is weird to me. There are 4 out of the 23 official races, 4 of them are in the Middle East. So Dick, tell me, what do you think about Bahrain?
Well, it's of the races in the Middle East, I think it's been the one that's the longest tenured. It came in the early 2000s, obviously set out in the desert. So again, you've got the issues with the sand blowing and what direction is the wind blowing. So that's stuff that the drivers and the engineers have to deal with. Over time, the surface itself has abraded. So the tire drag of that track is usually pretty high. And I think we saw, you know, some of the teams really struggling with tire drag when they raced there this year. Some of the teams like Aston Martin, I think part of what contributed to their shock finish on the podium at Bahrain was just because the Aston Martin seemed to be okay from a tire drag perspective, probably a result of the additional downforce. The other piece is that, you know, free practice 1 and free practice 3 are held in the afternoon, so that's going to be hot, sunny, all that kind of stuff. But qualifying and the race are under the lights, and so really sometimes I wonder how much use is free practice 1 and free practice 3. You know, if I was an engineer, I'd be kind of trying to balance out in my brain, okay, how has the air density changed from free practice 1 to free practice 2, which is going to be more representative of what they're facing in qualifying in the race. So bit of a challenge, I think, for the engineers, certainly for the drivers, just because of the wind and the sand.
John, the other place in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia. What are your thoughts there?
More sand, more wind, more heat, and more problems with tire drag and all sorts of questions and issues. Saudi Arabia is an interesting place, though. It is a night race, and that's kind of it makes it interesting. And it's a politically important race to the Middle East because the Saudis have a history of human rights abuses, and so frequently it's a subject of protests, and there have been issues of security that the teams have been concerned about. So it's interesting from that point of view. It is a street track and is interesting, I think, because of the twisty turny parts, and it makes it a real challenge for the cars to be set up and handling, and then sand blowing across and as they go kind of from dusk into the night. It's an interesting race and a challenge for them.
Australia,
Melbourne is where the race is. Melbourne is a really big city, busy city. And I've been to this race. It's an exciting race to go to and a wonderful race to go to. You can literally, as we did, rent a place that you can stay in town across the street from Albert Park. You can go walk back across afterwards and have a nice meal at a nice restaurant. That's not true of all racetracks. It is a street track, but it's street in the sense that it's all park. So it surrounds this lake, and it being early on in the season now, it's not first, but now they do sometimes have opportunity to bring upgrades, and so you begin to see what the development of the cars is going to look like. Those are the main thing. It's a very nice track. It's awfully quick to be inside the city of Melbourne.
I wish it was usually a little bit easier to watch, because for somebody living in the United States, it's way too early in the morning for me.
That's true. Well, what about Baku? How do you feel about that?
I think that it's a very interesting track. I mean, Baku is obviously a really old city. You can see the castle that they go by. I don't know how old it is, but it's clearly, there's sections of that track where the buildings are really old. And then obviously there's other parts that's quite modern. The track itself has that long main straightaway with a relatively tight first turn, which gives you all sorts of opportunities for overtaking and or carnage. But there's other sections of the track where it's quite narrow that also may not give you opportunities for overtaking, but it sure does give you opportunities for carnage. Normally, that race produces, a pretty entertaining event.
What about Miami?
Miami has done a really, really good job of doing their very best to be like the new Monaco, in my opinion. Lots of glitz and glamour. And of course, it's set up going around the Hard Rock Stadium there in Miami. Some parts of the track are permanent, some parts of the track are not permanent. And they had a real problem with the track surface last year, so much so that they actually went in and completely repaved the track this year. I hate to think about how much money they must have spent to go in and redo it. So we'll see what the verdict is from the drivers. I mean, last year, the track was pretty slippery and it never really gripped up, apparently. So this year, hopefully they'll have something that's more grippy, more raceable. The race itself was a bit of a snooze fest last year. And entering into the second year, this is kind of the danger zone, I think, for this track, in that, yeah, they had all the glitz and glamour and they delivered on that one big time. But the other side is, if the race continues to be a snooze, people are going to go somewhere else probably. I think, you get all the various celebrities, and I'm not going to just pick on Tom Brady, but, Brady was there last year. And so you've got that, kind of star power deal, but, he'll probably be there again this year. I mean, he lives in Miami now. But everybody's seen Tom now. So now what's the next big wow? What are you going to do next? And you're really going to have to deliver a race, in my opinion.
John, did you think it was a snooze fest last year?
As glamorous as Miami is, and as much as they tried, they didn't sell out. The crowd was just not there. I did think it was rather lackluster, at least. I don't know about snooze fest, but it was definitely lackluster.
Imola, Dick, what do you think about that?
Well, certainly a very historic track. Certainly one that, obviously, that's where Senna died. And so, there's always going to be a bit of a, I don't know. It's not that I dislike the track, but it's always kind of a, kind of deal like that. but I think that as a racetrack, it's a heck of a track. I mean, it's really quite the challenge for the driver. A wide range of corners of varying description. Fast, really fast corners versus low speed, and that kind of thing. So I think it's a great challenge for the drivers. Lots of uphill and downhill there. I like the track. I don't know that it's necessarily produced a ton of really great races. There have been some, particularly back in the day between Schumacher and Alonso. But I think overall, I think it's a nice addition to the calendar.
Let's go to Monaco, John.
So how long do we have to talk about Monaco?
We may have to make that this is part 1A of that Monaco conversation. I get the sense that you're a bit of a fan of Monaco.
I've been there. I am a fan. It's what Formula One is all about. All of the color, all of the sound, all of the wealth, all of everything is there. And the sound, the streets reverberating with the sound of Grand Prix engines going through there. It's just fantastic. They've been racing there since about 1929, I think. So it's got huge history. It's one of those tracks. It's a street track. And unfortunately, the cars have gotten so big and so heavy and so powerful that it's sort of obsolete now, but it has such a strong history that people just keep coming back. I wish they could do something about that. But yeah, elevation changes are unbelievable because it winds up the side of the mountains there on the coast and then comes back down. You've got all sorts of history, including, cars going into the Mediterranean, flipping over and going into the Mediterranean around where the swimming pool is now. You've got, there were 10 years where there were only two drivers who won Monaco, 84 to 93, I think it was. And that was Prost and Senna. And Prost won, I think, I don't know what, 6 times, and Senna won 4, or just the opposite. I think Senna won 6 and Prost won 4 in a row. I mean, their battle there was just epic. And then, of course, in 1984 was the controversial finish where it was the wettest Monaco Grand Prix, and it can get wet there just on a heartbeat anyway. But it was the wettest Grand Prix they'd ever had at Monaco. And Jackie Ickx, a fellow French-speaking countryman of Prost, called the race short at 31 laps when Senna was catching Prost at an unbelievable rate. And that didn't go down very well in the Senna camp. But and what else? McLaren has won something like 15 times there. So, that's huge. Damon Hill won 5 times in a number of years and was kind of called the king of Monaco. It's just a fantastic race.
Sorry, Dick, say that again.
It was Graham Hill that won 5 times.
Yeah, did I say Damon?
Won.
Sorry.
You said Damon, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Graham, and Damon's father, of course, and was one of those guys who was really elegant and a real gentleman and a great picture of Formula One race drivers.
So really, that's hearing from you, that's the legacy that as Formula One continues, if we can find a way to keep that allure, that aura, would be really nice, even as it expands out into different countries and races.
Yeah, unless Formula One changes, the fan base for Formula One is changing. The demographic is getting younger. There's more emphasis with Liberty Media owning the sport now on entertainment. I've been there, but I'll tell you the truth. It's a very difficult place to watch a race because you can see just glimpses of the cars for a very brief moment. And it's very crowded, very hard to get around, very expensive to have a room. Most people will get on the train or bus and move up or down the coast rather than stay in Monaco. So it's got real problems in terms of just continuing to have a race there, but hopefully they'll find a way.
That is a very different feel than especially what you just said about Australia. It seems like it's almost the counterpoint to that. Let's look onto Barcelona then, John. What do you think about that race?
Well, that's an interesting race, and it can be quite challenging. The track is very very interesting, challenging. It's got lots of nice curves. It's also got some pretty nice straight action. So the racing tends to be good here, I think. It's moved around, of course, during the years, but is settled in there and to me, it looks like it's probably going to stay there for the time being, as long as they have one. Certainly having Alonso still in F1 doesn't hurt, since he's from the Catalonia region.
Dick, do you want to add in on anything?
Well, actually, I'm going to throw in something and go back to Monaco for just a second.
Okay.
More time for Monaco.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly. Just a couple things. Number one, if you watch, go out on YouTube and watch some of the footage from Monaco in the 60s or the 50s or whatever, you sit there and look at it, and you kind of go, okay, the buildings have changed, but really, other than that swimming pool complex, nothing has changed with that track. I mean, it's the same thing that they've been driving on. And it is absolutely amazing to watch some of those cars going around there back in the day, because they were moving, considering the technology and the power they had. The other part is, I think the swimming pool section with the modern F1 cars is about as spectacular as it gets, because they're going through there so fast and they're missing the barriers by inches. I think it's just, it's an amazing thing to watch. The other piece is, a friend of mine went to Monaco for a conference. It wasn't Grand Prix weekend, but it was there for a conference. And he's a big racing fan, and he walked the track, and he said, you just wouldn't believe it. The streets are so narrow. And he goes, it's just, I don't know how these guys do it. It really shows just the level of skill just to get around there and keep the car in one piece. So that's all I have to say. As far as Barcelona, pretty much what John was saying. I think that, it's just got a great blend of different characteristics that, again, I think it makes it for a great place to go and not only have a race, but also to go and do some proper testing.
Interesting that a place that was really good for testing is no longer the place for testing. Canada.
So obviously Montreal is probably the most European city here in North America. It's obviously, on an island, basically. And again, this is one of those tracks where they spend a lot of time at full throttle. It's got some pretty long straightaways. It certainly has the wall of champions, where you've got to make a good run on the very last corner to get out onto the main straightaway. And that wall has caught a lot of people and ruined a perfectly good lap time. It can rain there because it's, obviously it's sitting right in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. And so the weather does change. The weather can be absolutely spectacular, or it can be like, man, I'm glad I'm watching on TV and I'm not there because of the rain. And so I think what comes to mind for me was in Michael Schumacher's last year with Mercedes, he very nearly won that race because he was so good, and it would rain and then it'd go dry, and then it'd rain and it'd go dry. And I mean, it was constantly back and forth, and he just played it to perfection. Had as I recall, a terrific battle with Jenson Button with that in that race. So anyway, Button prevailed, but that was a great race.
Canada.
Canada is a great environment for a race. It's really good for fans. It's very accessible for those of us in North America to go there. It is a great city, Montreal, and it can be a very interesting race, especially as they go down and through the 190 or the 290-degree 180 long onto the back straight. So it's an interesting track, interesting races, and like Dick says, the weather can really be interesting there.
And I feel like, John, you mentioned in the past that this race in Canada was not historically held at this track. There was a different one. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was previously at Mosport, which is a more interesting track, harder to get to in between Toronto and Montreal, but is a fantastic track with huge elevation changes, blind turns going over the hill and down, huge compression. I can't imagine. It's too challenging a track, I think, for modern Formula One cars, because I think the drivers would just have their backs crushed as they go through the compression there. It's just, it is a spectacular track, though.
Yeah, they also ran the Canadian Grand Prix at Saint-Jovite one year. I want to say
right.
It was either 1968, 1969, something like that. And Saint-Jovite really doesn't host any big races anymore, but there's a lot of club stuff, Ferrari Challenge stuff that still goes on there. But it's nestled on the side of a ski slope, basically, and it's really pretty spectacular. But I don't think I'd ever want to think about trying to take a F1 car, a modern F1 car around that place without doing a lot of upgrades for safety.
Austria, the Spielberg or Red Bull Ring. Here's one thing I've was always been confused. Why is it called the Red Bull Ring? Is that normal for teams to have a circuit named after them?
Well, Red Bull bought the track originally, and I'll slaughter the name, but it was the Österreich Ring, I think is what it was called. And it was, I think we had talked about this, but it was actually quite a bit longer at one time. And then it actually was a track that was used in the 1970s. And, huge elevation changes, all that kind of stuff. There's certainly been shots of like deer standing on the side of the track with F1 cars going by the poor deer, and stuff like that. So then, and I don't know if it's because Lauda retired or whatever, but around that same time, the track did not host an F1 race for quite some time. And then it came back, and it was bought by Red Bull, and the configuration was changed to a large degree. Some of the corners have been retained and all that, but what you have now is this unbelievably picturesque setting in a valley between a couple of mountain ranges. I'm sure it was the Alps probably, and it's an amazing setting. A buddy of mine went there last year. He took his family. He lives here in Dallas and went there, and he said you just cannot believe how spectacular the place is, and loved every minute of it. And of course, they had perfect weather and all that kind of good stuff. But that's a track that's actually produced some surprise results. I think that it's a track that rewards a good driver more so than some of the other tracks out there.
John, you want to add in anything?
Yeah, a couple of things. It's a very technical track, and so it does reward those drivers who are superb technicians. And just one bit on the change from the Österreich Ring to the A1 and then laterly Red Bull. In '87, they had to restart it twice because it has a very narrow pit lane entrance, and so the track, and in those days we were in the high horsepower turbo cars, 1100 horsepower, and I think the average speed for the race that year was 160 miles an hour or something like that for average speed. So it was just deemed too dangerous, and that's when they shut it down. And until the A1 ring, they refurbished it, and then the Red Bull ring has come along after that. I've never been there. I've been by it, but my understanding, Dick, you may know about this, is that there's a museum there that Dietrich Mateschitz established, the Red Bull Museum, and there's all kinds of really, really interesting stuff there.
Okay, let's look at Silverstone, which I really am impressed by that circuit. But I understand that that's the first Formula One, the inaugural of Formula One. I mean, I know there were races before then, but considered the beginning of the Formula One racing officially?
I believe you're right. I'd have to go back and have a look at that, but just just to give some history in that, the Grand Prix races initially were to demonstrate the technology of the automobile industry and cars, and so they had a problem with durability, so they scheduled these tests where they drive over miles and miles of road to prove that the car were capable of it, and then they moved on to circuits. Silverstone was, as probably everybody knows, a bomber base during World War II, and they've just converted, over the years, they've converted the runways and connected them together with turns. So you have this spectacular, out in the middle of nowhere, racetrack where these cars can just go incredibly fast and very, very fast turns. Pops is one, Cascome. I mean, they're just spectacular to watch, and you can see a good bit of the track from the grandstands, various grandstands. It's run by the Grand Prix Drivers Club. They own it, and they've built fantastic facilities for their members and then also for spectators. In the 70s, I think, one of the races, the weather is almost always a factor there. And as we know, it can rain in England. And I just remember one of the races in the 70s, Dick, you may remember which one, but at any rate, it rained, and about half of the field piled into one corner, and they were all just wrecked into the one corner of the track because of the sudden onset of rain.
Yes, I remember that one. I was thinking of the one where Jody Scheckter lost it at the end of the first lap. I want to say 1973, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right. And Jody Scheckter at the time was an absolute wild child. And he was driving like the third McLaren or something like that. Back in those days, you could enter more than two cars. And I mean, he took out about half the field. The wreck was just massive. And, tires and wheels and body work going everywhere. And everybody got up and walked away from it. But there weren't a whole lot of cars left.
Oh, my.
Yeah, if you look at it, I'm sure it's out on YouTube, man. I mean, it was massive. And I had forgotten about that one about the rain, but yeah, that was another one where it was just sort of like, holy smokes. The damage, the bill for the damage was like, I don't even want to think about it. Make your eyes water.
Yeah.
Huge.
Wow. Okay, so when I did sim racing for the first time, I did the Silverstone track. That was addicting. I loved it, and I can't wait to go back and do sim racing again. Okay, but let's move on. There are so many more tracks to cover. The Hungaroring, John, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, very interesting from a historical point of view. It's the first race that was held behind the Iron Curtain, as we knew it in those days. Bernie Ecclestone gets full credit for making that happen. And, I never thought of him really as a diplomat, but there he is right in the middle of it. There were even 200,000 people at the first race. So that's pretty amazing considering what the economy of that part of the world was at that time. Yeah, it's been an interesting track. It's where first Spanish win. Alonso is the first Spaniard to ever win there. And the youngest Grand Prix winner at the time. And then, let's see, Schumacher equaled Prost's record of wins at 51 there in 2001. And so it's got an interesting history. It's not, it's not, I think, a track that's too incredibly technical, but interesting. Hamilton, interestingly, has won there 8 times. Which is pretty amazing. Schumacher only won 4, if you want to compare the two.
Hungaroring is a high downforce, hard to pass kind of track. I won't say you put a Monaco setup on it, but you're getting pretty close. And as an engineer, I think probably, I don't know this for sure, but I think my first thing that I would do is I would just start in practice, just start piling on downforce until the car goes slower. It's one of those tracks where you really have to qualify well if you're going to have any hope at all of a good result.
Then let's move to Spa. Dick, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly one of the very classic tracks on the calendar. It's in the Ardennes forest. It's very close to Bastogne, as I understand it. And it originally was a little over 8 miles long. But just like the original Nürburgring in Germany, it really was too long for its own good. And so they shortened it. It's now around 4 miles long. So they basically cut it in half. But, there's videos out on YouTube that you can watch where people go out, in modern day cars and drive the old circuit as well, the section that's no longer used. And it's, you can see why they quit using it. Cause it was crazy dangerous. But all that being said, you still have Eau Rouge, which is absolutely spectacular. And then you have really just this really nice flow and rhythm that track gets. Just the drivers just seem to really enjoy it. I know several guys, John knows them too, who've driven at Spa, and they all say it's just this unbelievable track that's very satisfying to get right. The weather is super changeable. It's just that part of the world where you can have sun, one moment, and 30 minutes later, torrential downforce. So, it's quite the place.
I just think it's a spectacular track. There's no end of admiration for the track. The they're struggling. The lady who was the manager of the track passed away this past year, and they're really struggling, I understand, to keep it together. I hope they're able to. It is historic. It is a beautifully situated track, and it's just awesome to watch cars go through Eau Rouge.
Well, that takes us all the way up to beginning of our summer break. I think that's a good place for us to pause, and then we can resume the rest of the calendar in a part B conversation. Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? I wonder if you found as much value as I did. This talk has been foundational to my F1 knowledge, and I hope it's the same for you. Or maybe you're an old school fan like the guys. Did you find yourself agreeing or disagreeing with their views? Let us know. Drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guysagirlandf1.com. As I said at the beginning of our episode, if you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.